the beginning and see where we get by the time Ray gets in and our first speaker will join us. So welcome everyone to our December Social Determinants Work Group meeting. I think a couple of quick housekeeping items. We want to welcome two new members to the group, and then a returning face who now is a new member to the group. So Cora Scott is joining us from the Brandywine School District. Cora, do you want to introduce yourself and just share a little about your role and what excites you most about being here?
Sure. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Cora Scott, Assistant Superintendent in Brandywine for Oversee Academic Achievement. And I am excited to just be a part of the work of pushing forward, making sure that good things are happening for kids. I was a part of WEIC, one of the groups there, who looked at partnerships with charter schools, and we did some good professional development things there. So I'm glad to kind of be back. I attend most meetings anyway, so I'm glad to be a part of the group.
Great. Thanks, Cora. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
And then Daylene Johnson, Dr. Daylene Johnson from DSU. You want to take a moment to introduce yourself and what you do and what excites you most about being part of the group?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to join you. Again, my name is Daylene Johnson. I'm faculty in the mathematics department at Delaware State University, but I'm also a mathematics educator. And much of my work in teaching and research and education has focused on issues of equity and social justice in education. So I'm excited to explore those areas and to work with you on the committee, on the working group.
Welcome. Yeah, well, welcome aboard, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you.
And then we have with joining us in official capacity as a member of the work group now, Kristen Dwyer from DSEA. She is taking the spot of Jeff Tashner, who asked to kind of just flip-flop because of other obligations and a different workload in the coming months. And he really values the work of this group and wanted to make sure that it got the just attention that it needed. And he felt Kristen was going to be a glowing addition. So Kristen, you want to introduce yourself, like your role, what you do, and then what excites you most about being here?
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. My name is Kristen Dwyer. I'm the lobbyist for the Delaware State Education Association. I have a very long title, but that's basically what I am. I represent our members to the General Assembly, to our statewide elected officials, and at times our congressional delegation. This work is very meaningful to me. Over the past few years, I've been engaged in work around House Bill 100, but also school-based wellness centers. And I want to see a lot of the work that we started around addressing social determinants of health. I want to see that come to fruition. So very happy to be here, and thank you for allowing me to attend in Jeff's stead.
It was a very easy decision to round out the group with Kristen and our two new additions. So we're excited to have a quorum present today. Ray will be joining us shortly. She texted she was on a call actually with the governor and our speaker. So it ought to be interesting to see how that goes, and they should be here hopefully shortly. Our meeting norms, they've been the same since we started, and we have not had an issue with it, so we'll continue to move forward. I do not see currently anyone from the public here, but there will be time at the conclusion for public comment as always. And I don't believe we'll need to do a formal roll call, but if everybody could just sign in the chat, that'd be great right now, just to say that you're here so we can get it recorded for those of you who are members of the work group. Okay, and so that said, I believe the first order of business would be approving the minutes from our last meeting. I know that Haley had shared those around the room. Were there any comments, questions, or concerns before I seek a motion to approve? All right, that said, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes from I believe it was our November meeting?
I move to approve and accept the minutes from the November meeting.
Thank you, Terry. Can I get a second? Show a quick hand. Mark?
Second.
Mark unmuted, so I'm counting that. I don't care. Thank you, Tamara, for joining in. So Mark and Tamara, second. Thumbs up sign on the screen for favor of approval. All right. Any non-approvals? Thumbs up for non-approval. Any abstentions because you were not a part of the group? Okay, then the approval of the minutes carries. What I wanted to do now is just kind of give you an idea of the way the agenda is going to move forward today, what the plan is, and well, what is and was. It depends on when Ray comes in here with from the meeting with the governor and Jim will be dictate a little bit of what goes on. Our first item was to have Jim Simmons basically take center stage to explain and talk a little bit about the Wilmington Learning Collaborative, but not as an open mic, us asking questions, but him responding to the questions that we've already collected and just giving him time to share those thoughts. And we were thinking that we'd give him between 15 and 20 minutes and then leave 10 minutes for us to do any follow-up questions with that. We did want to give him the grace and space to kind of walk through everything without kind of asking a lot of questions, to kind of like cut and chop and flow his presentation. So that's the first item of business that we have. The second item was to have Kristen was going to be presenting a House bill related to early childhood that is being brought forward or is in draft form. I can't remember which. The lobbyists and the legislators in the room here will always set me straight around whether I'm using the right terminology, but there's a piece of early childhood legislation that she's going to be talking about. And then we are going to, that's between roughly 10 and 15 minutes. It depends on, the timing. And then we will close out with Yvette Santiago. Hopefully she joins us here. She's going to talk a little bit about what's coming up with relations to school-based wellness in about 10 minutes. All right, so it's going to be Kristen, Representative Williams, and Dawn are going to be speaking around the early childhood. I don't see why we can't start with the early childhood presentation, House Bill 144, and then when Ray comes in, we'll just kind of let them fall in line. And Mr. Simmons is just going to have to wait. No offense to him, but he can just wait if he was planning on being here for the first 30 minutes. So I'm sure he'll be fine with that. That said, I'll turn it over to Kristen, Representative Williams, and Dawn, if you want to, whoever's going to take the lead and share with us House Bill 144 and what it means for this group.
So thanks, Jeff. This is Kim Williams. I think I'll just start it off and then Kristen and Dawn will jump in. Can you hear me? Because I have a very loud heater in my room that decided to kick in as soon as I started to speak. So I hope you can hear me okay.
We can hear you fine.
Thank you. So thank you for having us here today to talk about this important piece of legislation. House Bill 144 was filed during the first part of the 151st, and I have a House substitute bill that we will be filing in place of it. And what this bill does, I'll just back up a little bit. When there was the lawsuit between the NAACP and the ACLU and the settlement with the governor's office, one of the things that was settled on was the K-3 basic special education bill, which I'm thrilled we worked on that for DSCA, myself and many others worked on that for 3 General Assemblies and over 6 years. But one thing that was left out of that was pre-K. We fund pre-K intensive and complex from pre-K to 12th grade, but we do not fund pre-K currently, the basic special education. Well, we do fund it, but we don't fund it at the levels it should be funded. It doesn't mirror the basic special education K-3 bill. So what this bill will do is we are going to fund 2-year-olds at a 7-to-1 ratio, which is recommended by the Department of Ed. And then we're going to fund 3, 4, and 5-year-olds before they hit kindergarten. We are going to fund that at 8.4-to-1, as we do with the current bill that was just passed, House Bill 86. So we'll fund that. They will mirror each other. So 2-year-olds will be funded at 7.1, 7 students to 1 teacher. And then the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds will be funded at 8.4-to-1. We're also going to make sure that we identify, because right now in the code it just says preschool. So sometimes folks will look at the state law and think that we are funding all preschool children, which we are not. Currently, we fund preschool basic education students at 12.8. So that is the crux of the bill. And then I'll let Kristen take it from here. And if you have any questions, we can take it after both Kristen and Dawn speak about the bill.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Jeff, is it okay to continue? I see our guests have arrived. Is that okay? Sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, let's go ahead and let's finish this
Okay.
presentation, then we'll jump in with Jim and his presentation.
Okay. So this year, thanks to the advocacy of a lot of our pre-K members, we have added quality early childcare to our legislative agenda. So when Representative Williams presented us with this bill, it was obviously a very easy and natural fit for us. I think a lot of folks in this group, better than most people out in the general public, will understand continuity when it comes to a quality childcare center into kindergarten, and then kindergarten into first grade, into second grade, and into third grade and beyond. For us, reducing that ratio is very critical for our members, because right now we have most of these centers are half day. So you could have, by the end of the school year, 20 kiddos in a class that will need some sort of accommodation based on their qualifying, I don't want to, what's the word, based on what they were identified as, either basic, intense, or complex. And what we're hearing kind of overwhelmingly from our members is that they're just that, they are overwhelmed. Not only are they doing the work of a spec ed educator, they're also the homeroom teacher. So they actually have 2 jobs during the day. It's not just that they are doing the push-ins, they are literally there from the day the bell, from the start of the day to the end of the day for these kiddos. So it makes absolute sense that we continue the good work of House Bill 86, I believe it was, Kim, and push it all the way down to pre-K. I think pre-K is really a blind spot for a lot of policymakers, and it's really, the onus is on us to speak up when we see a change that would obviously create better learning and working conditions in the K-12 environment, but that would also fit nicely in the pre-K environment as well. One thing I do want to leave this group here with is just the experience that our kindergarten teachers have when they are taking a child in, regardless of ability, from a quality early child care center. The routines, the structures that were established in these early child care centers are there and they're present. And that's so important, because it really gets kids in the space to learn, or to develop that life skill that they may need, or to fluctuate or transition. Transitions are another key area. Transition from one accommodation to another, and do that kind of effortlessly and seamlessly as possible when we're talking about 5-year-olds. So on behalf of our membership, we're happy to support this, and we're really lucky that Representative Williams reached out to us to help with this.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Dawn, did you have anything to add before we open it up for questions, or is that?
I just want to share one table. It's one slide. So Haley, if you can allow me to share my screen, that would be great.
Dawn, can you share it now? I just stopped sharing. Perfect.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. So just so everyone is able to see that when we look at ratios that are what's national best practice and also what we already have established in our state, national best practice recommends a 1:6 ratio for 2-year-olds and then a 1:10 as the lowest ratio. So, or pardon me, the ratio that the maximum, there should be no more than 10 children for one teacher. But it's really important to point out that we're looking at ratios in classrooms where most of the children do not have a disability. So this is the ratio that's national best practices from the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And then these are Delaware STARS ratios, and all of our districts, but I believe 2 currently participate in Delaware STARS. So these are the ratios that are put forth by Delaware STARS. So 1:7 for 2-year-olds, 1:9 for 3-year-olds, 1:11 for 4-year-olds as a maximum. And again, mostly children without a disability. And then these are child care licensing ratios. And this is what we currently have in special education. And so as someone who has been a preschool special educator, now working as a program coordinator, I know firsthand how difficult it is to have one adult and to really be able to best serve children. And so if we look at what's best for children, we absolutely need to reduce the ratios. One more thing to say is, I can stop this and I can share this chart if anyone wants to look at this, but I wanted to have this as a reference, looking at what is national best practice and what we already have established in the state. That when we look at ratios, we always look at a system where the younger a child is, the smaller the ratio. So one adult to fewer children. So it really makes sense for us to reduce that 12.8 ratio for basic special ed and bring it in line with what we're doing for kindergarten through 12th grade. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Great. And does anybody from the work group have any questions for Representative Williams, Dawn, or Kristen? I do find it, first of all, I just say Representative Williams all the time. I still resist using your first name, Representative Williams. I'm so sorry. I've tried like heck to say Kim, but I just can't bring myself to do it. I want to apologize.
Say it.
I'm trying. Every time I say that, it kind of sticks in my mind. I digress.
Well, just say it once right now.
Kim, I will say it just for
There
you.
you go. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for continuing this work, all of you. I know that it is important work, and I do know it creates, a lot of conversation in the schools and amongst the chiefs in a variety of fashions. A lot of times, there's a reaction and response, and I don't think anybody can fundamentally disagree with the philosophy and the approach and the reason for it. I think we do need to continue those conversations with the chiefs for what it looks like in the classrooms, what it looks for the space that they have, the current facilities, and how those ratios could impact the staffing down the road. I just think just to be mindful and open of that discussion. That's just having sitting around the table, almost for over a year plus now. I know that is an important topic, and I don't know if Darrell wants to add anything to that. I don't want to call you in, Darrell, but just food for thought if you have anything.
Well, you just did.
Okay.
I appreciate it. No, I think, again, thank you to Representative Williams and Kristen, and obviously Dawn, for the presentation. And then, as Jeff indicated, no one can push back against the advocacy, obviously, to do what's right for our little kiddos, our pre-K children who most oftentimes are forgotten, having, served in multiple school districts. I will flag again the notion that we have to be mindful about the facilities impact, especially as we are now forced to come under the Office of Child Care Licensing relative to our facilities. And then the fact that we oftentimes are hiring master degrees teachers. So the need in terms of what that means for staffing on the district relative to what we might be seeing in a lot of our centers outside, just being conscious of that. Again, I think we all support it, definitely want to lower those ratios. But again, being mindful of that impact, especially around facilities when we're looking at needing that additional space and the fact that we don't get capital funding for preschool settings.
Yeah, Jeff, could I just make a comment? I just want everyone to understand, we're not saying that your 2-year-old classrooms, we're not saying that you have to have classrooms of 8.4 students, because we understand that there's typical students that will be in there. We're saying we're going to give you the resources instead of the 12.8, you're going to have resources based on 8.4 or 7.1. So I just want to make sure we don't get Senate Bill 169 confused with what we're doing here. That's all.
Correct. Thank you for the clarification. And I do think that there is a little bit of when it's heard, how it's heard, and what it's interpreted as, it needs to be mindful of. And I think that, Dawn continues to be a sounding board for that. And I know Kristen is, and yourself as well. And, it's incumbent upon myself and Darrell and other chiefs who understand that to try to put that word out, but also to recognize the other needs that we have. So I hear you. Yeah, great. Thank you.
And I was just in Eastside Charter School this morning, taking a tour. I've been in there a number of times, and that's what Aaron and I were talking about, that like the K through 3 bill, what it does is, we're not saying you have to have a certain amount of kids. What we're saying is, if you have these students with disabilities, you get the resources so they're able to put a para in there with the teacher to support the teacher. So I just want to make sure we understand that.
No, thank you very much. Agreed. Dawn, Dawn, if you want to close it out, Dawn, because I want to move on to our guests for our other presentation.
Thank you so much. There's one more piece I want to add to that. So again, you can have 2 adults in one room, 2 certified teachers doing TAM teaching, but it also allows for the increase of itinerant service provision. So many of us are serving children in what we call the least restrictive environment, the LRE. So they're being served, or we have the capability to serve children at a local Head Start, at a child care center where they're already enrolled. And that's difficult for many of our districts when the ratio is so high, because we don't have the staff to be able to send to centers, but to be able to increase the number of itinerant service providers. So it's really important to know that doesn't mean that needs to be another classroom. That means that the child care programs with whom we partner, and we really value those partnerships, they can also receive the support to keep children who have an identified disability in their child care center or in the Head Start, and the services can go to the child.
Great. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, can I just ask a question? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I know we have another presentation, but Representative Williams, is this sort of like usual, as we see in K to 12, we usually lead with special education, and then we address the needs of our low income and our English learners. So is that the intent? Do you foresee a follow-up bill that would then take it a step further?
So I am just trying to make sure that we have a consistent funding stream throughout the pre-K through the 12th grade system that we currently have. Currently, we fund the intensive and complex pre-K through 12th, but we don't do that for the basic, the very early, the very minor disabilities. And so I'm not saying no, but at this time, I'm just focused on this right now. So that would be a conversation I'd be willing to have down the road. So yes, but that's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for entertaining a switch around in the agenda. And I do believe one of our other speaker from the Office of Equity and Innovation, Jim Simmons, is with us now. And I don't want to speak totally out of term, Jim, but you did receive, I believe, a set of questions in advance that you were going to be kind of responding and reacting to. The thinking was we'd give you the floor until you finish that, and then we would ask follow-up questions. That way you can kind of keep your train of thought and get through what you have prepared, and then we'll come back with any follow-up questions. And I think we can still keep it to 30 minutes because we didn't really change anything other than just move some move the presentations around. So we do have about 30 minutes for those, and Haley will be able to put the questions up on the screen for us so we can follow along, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. I did have the questions. Haley, thank you for sending those. And we can cut this down to about 5 minutes. The answers, I don't know. I'm just kidding. I think, so let me preface it with, I jokingly say that, but one of the rubs with what we're trying to do is build a collaboration that's from the ground up versus from the top down. So for we, he, meaning me, OGov or the governor, to come in with answers to say, this is what we're going to do, is an oxymoron to building a collaborative, right? And so what the goal is to create a framework and then get partners around the table to say, and I'm going to use a different term instead of collaborative, to say we're going to create a larger PLC to work on these problems together, right? So that's really, when I looked at the questions, I can almost use the same answer from all. I certainly won't do that and insult anyone's intelligence, but I'll go through them and field some others. John Sheehan's here also, because, you know, sometimes from an educator standpoint, it's one way, and from OGov, and the term I like to use is they work with restrictions, right? And so a lot of times our thoughts aren't necessarily restricted. And so I think it's important for everybody to hear that too. So the first question is probably the biggest one that when I looked at how do we answer it, because I think that certainly the students who reside in the city are still part of the bigger plan for how do we ensure that all kids who reside in the city are exposed to it, and what I like to term it as the opportunity gap, or closing the opportunity gap. And so we know that in our I'm gonna call it dysfunctional system of governance for the city of Wilmington, that there's a population of students on the northeast side that are going to Colonial, and Colonial doesn't have a building there, right? And so we've done it around structures initially to try to figure out, like, what's our limiting factor into how we do this. I think, and Darrell, correct me if I'm wrong, he and I spoke the other day, I think it was Darrell anyway, about the fact that we've offered this for charters to participate without throwing them under the bus at all. I don't know what their interest level is, but when you look at the number of students that reside in the city, almost 50% or higher are going to charter schools, right? And so I think it's not just the Colonial students that we got to figure out how to include that live in the city. I think it's those other ones who aren't going to those schools in what I term the big three that we try to include as well. I think it's getting you, Darrell, Link, who am I forgetting, Dan, and those charter school leaders around the table to say, how can we find the best way that we can make sure that this plan impacts all those students? The other part I'd add is it could be starting small, taking lesson learned, and then breaking it out into a larger scheme. The better scenario or bigger scenario would be, if we can create this collaborative that works in the city, how can we take that down to Kent and Sussex County, where it could be effective there as well? So I think there's some opportunities, but I think it's going to take more than me, John Sheehan, and the governor's office. I think it's going to take all those educators around the table to look at and say, what can we do to incorporate it and be creative and think outside the box. One of the words in my title is innovation, and I don't think we've done enough innovation when we look at how we're going to educate kids in the city of Wilmington.
Hey, Jim, if I could just share with you, I sit on the board of the Community Education Building, and I know at our last board meeting, we talked about talking to you, and I think Linda Jennings is going to be reaching out to you. We are interested in learning more about how the charter schools, especially those in the CEB, can be part of the collaborative.
That's awesome. And so tell her, reach out as quickly as possible so that we can get, it's just one more group of people that we have an opportunity to get. And so I know the format is for me to go through these questions, but please feel free to jump in. This is not a monologue at all. I've never operated or presented that way. And so certainly feel free to jump right in. So any consideration given to restructuring the collaborative schools that a majority of students reside. I think I addressed that a little bit around where they reside. Because when you think about Brandywine, I don't know if anyone from Brandywine is on that call, or on this call, excuse me, because I can't see the list of participants, but you could argue they're in the same boat where, because when the Neighborhood Schools Act was enforced, they decided to partial out their residents in the city so that they didn't have those concentrations of poverty. And so, like in every neighborhood, in my neighborhood alone, you know, I don't know about the middle and high and elementaries exactly, but students in my neighborhood go to all of the schools in Brandywine. You know, 2 streets over, my son's supposed to go to Concord, another kid goes. So they've divided the wealth and the poverty equally across the districts as best as possible. So I think it is an opportunity to look at how can we include as many people as possible, because to me, this is a plan that's starting with students who reside in the city, but it's about improving educational outcomes for all kids. One of my favorite sayings when I was the principal is, it doesn't matter the number that you have that are proficient, it's still the number that aren't. Right. You know, I think when I left Mount Pleasant, we were 70 some proficient in English and math. And I used to say, we still got 20 to 30% that aren't, that we still got to address, because their parents are sending them to us with the expectation that we're going to provide them the best education possible. Based on a review of other models, what lessons have surfaced? So a couple things that I think that, one, when we talk about these other models, is one, to clarify that it's just, we took a framework from them, because I don't know that any other model fits what's going on in Wilmington. We just had a virtual meeting. Some of the people on this call were on that call on Friday. And some of the things that we heard, we go, well, that doesn't really apply here. One, most of them were governance, where it was a mandated or a takeover order in order to get them to collaborate. Not that once they got in, it wasn't beneficial, but it's much different when you're telling someone to do something versus asking them to participate. So I think that that's important to hear. One of the things I did hear was, even though those schools were in the same district, I think for every one of the models that were included on Friday, they did not use a shared curriculum. They had the curriculum selected at the building level. I'm in favor of a shared curriculum because of the transient population of our people that we're talking about. But, you know, again, I think if we get around the table and the collaborative says, you know, we firmly believe in the curriculum they have, I think we've got to honor that. I'm in favor of it the other way, but I'm not a one man, one vote here. And so where my vote counts more than anyone else's. So I think we've got to be cognizant of that as well. The other thing that I think that we heard from lessons learned was the impact of the teachers being involved at the decision making. I thought that resonated through all of the different sessions, that the teacher involvement piece and that level of trust, that level of partnership was probably as vital as anything that I heard. And then I said to Dr. Bunning in my check-in today, one of the misfortunes of such a long day on Friday was, to me, the most impactful information came from the young lady from the NEA. I want to say Allison Walker is her name. Forgive me if I'm speaking the wrong name, but I think we were all Zoom tired by that time, right? And so it would have been nice to hear Angela. So I thank you, Kristen. So I would have liked to heard her information when we weren't, like, everybody was like rubbing their eyes and stretching their legs. And so I would like to hear that again. I know she did send the slide deck, but I'd like to hear her presentation again. I think it would be advantageous. Those were the big things that I took out of the model. The other piece that I didn't hear, which we're hearing in our model, is the impact on high school. I think we have to address the high school issue, but I don't think we have to address the high school issue before we move forward. I think that we can address the high school issue while we start to improve outcomes. I think, as a former high school guy, I think that the more kids that come prepared for high school as we work out where they're going to go, the better off we're doing for every high school, regardless of where they go. I was fortunate in Brandywine to have to deal with 2 of the 3 middle schools as they transitioned from 8th grade to us. And so a lot of times I partnered with those principals, Dr. Carter and can't remember Jackie's last name at Springer at the time. And then we got some from Springer, some from Tally, and then some from PS. So partnering with all of them as they transition to make sure that those kids were best prepared as they transition to us. And again, as we address that issue, that is huge when we think about the city of Wilmington. Reach out to parents. So parent feedback, we did, so the first thing is we have a number of parent conversations and engagement coming up. The first one is tomorrow at Pulaski. And last Saturday, the Governor, John Sheehan, and I, with the help of Daryl Chambers' group, the Committee for Structural Integrity, I think it's called. I always forget the name of his acronym. And I apologize to Jeff's point if I call him Wolfie. I've known Daryl forever as Wolfie. So if I call him Wolfie by accident, it's no disrespect. But we did a city walk in Pulaski to try to get parents to come out to the meeting, whether they had students in Bayard, or in this case, Pulaski, or not, but also if they had students at Pulaski, really urge them to come out to hear the plan, get their feedback, because oftentimes we spend so much time doing things to and for people versus with, and we want this plan to be done with people. And we say with, that's teachers, educators, parents, building administrators, and the like. What are plans to continue the feedback? I think they're ongoing. Oh, Terry, thank you. The Center for Structural Equity. I think these meetings are ongoing. John Sheehan said today, this is one of the meetings I was in, I think with DOE, was our 80th meeting around this issue. When I say meeting, not always a presentation, sometimes it's a follow-up, but 80th meeting around the collaborative and/or follow-up discussions, and they're ongoing, and we're going to continue to have those, because again, when people hear it, whether it's for the first time, second time, or third time, each time they hear something a little different, or different thoughts pop into their heads. And so every meeting that we have, I usually put my email and my cell number into the chat, and John Sheehan does the same, so that we welcome to engage those folks either individually or in smaller groups, so that they can feel that their voices are heard as well. I think when we look at, so I don't know that we're going to escape accountability when we look at how will success be measured, but I don't think that that's the sole measure. One of the things I really thought was valuable in school improvement was the report card that looked at many different measurable points. And so I think that, and I shared this with someone today, if we were to grow one school by just proficiency measures, 8 percentage points in 1 year, people would ask you to do TED Talks and all the like, because you've done such a great thing. Well, what a proficiency rates being is where they are in those schools in the city, 8 percentage points might get us to 25, right? And that's still not acceptable. So I think we've got to look at multiple ways where we can look at how we're measuring the students. I think growth and proficiency, I think we've got to look at not only just attendance, but participation in attendance, right? Like we oftentimes look at engagement as just being there. I think we've got to find different ways to measure engagement when they're there, and what are the outcomes students are receiving. I think when you look at what a standard is, it's what do students know and able to do? So I think we've got to find a tool and a mechanism to measure what are students actually able to do and apply the knowledge that we're giving to them. And I think schools have fallen short of that. We've asked them to regurgitate information for test taking purposes. And I think we've got to find a way to measure what they're able to do with the information. I keep losing track of my question. Number 11. Thank you. Is that you, Haley? Will the timing of the MOU allow participating schools to align? No, it won't. And so curriculum adoption takes time. I remember when we did a curriculum adoption in Brandywine, the different committees we had, and it took years. And I think we've got to be willing to look at the curriculum moving forward. It could be, and I've said this in a meeting that I see Darrell on the screen. It could be that we select a curriculum that Red Clay is already using, that maybe the other two or maybe one of the three aren't. And so maybe that's the one that the collaborative decides to go with. But then we've got to now purchase materials, provide professional learning or professional development. And I'd say ongoing, oftentimes it's a one and done, and we certainly don't want it to be that way. So I think what we've got to find a way to do is get this started with the understanding that we're going to be building or completing this in phases. Like Rome didn't get built in a day, and neither will this collaborative be built in a year. But to wait to start until we have everything in place would mean more years that students have been left behind with missing out on opportunities that they deserve. The curriculum alignment work, I think I touched on a little bit. I think it's that collaborative piece and looking at what's in the best interest. I think we've got to look at cultural responsiveness of curriculum and how does it address it. I think all kids should be able to see themselves and others in their educational experiences. I heard a quote one day say, students should all be able to look out the window and in the mirror at the same time. And I thought it was a very powerful thought process when we look at curriculum. For so long, the curriculum doesn't include people who look like certain folks, and then those folks disengage because they want to know, one, that they can see themselves in this, but also when they see themselves, it's in a positive light, and oftentimes that's not been the case. It's always been that negative depiction of who they are and who their culture or race has been, and so I think we've got to address that as well. How will the collaborative ensure that the alignment of different types of funding? So I think the funding piece is something that's overwhelming in a long one. I think that how schools are funded, I don't know that I have the authority to change that, but what we can do is look at how can we be creative and be flexible in the spending. How are teachers being used? How are staff being hired? I think those are some funding things that I think we can use differently. I think there's some stuff coming out of Reading. In my mind, I think mostly because my office oversees part of that is diversifying the educator workforce and recruiting and retention. And so I think we've got to look at that. I believe it's $10 million. Don't hold me to that. I got lots of numbers floating around in my head, but $10 million was allocated by the legislators to Reading around recruiting and retaining, and I would also add diversifying. And when I say diversifying, we've got to be very clear what that means. That means teachers of color. That means LGBTQ community. That means our special needs population. That means males in elementary school. Yes, $10 million. All right, so having that overarching look at what does diversifying mean, and not to just think it means people of color. Will there be room for student voice? I think there has to be. Kudos to, and I don't want to exclude anybody, so if you have this, Jeff Menzer, please tell me, but I know that Darrell has a student member on his board. I just saw that Christina just named a student member to their board and an alternative. Jeff, do you guys have a student representative? So now that's at least 3, and I know Brandywine has always had students report out, and I don't know where they are along that discussion, but I think that, again, back to one of the statements I said earlier, oftentimes we're doing things with, to and for people and not with them, and I think we've got to include students. To pretend that we know what to provide for students and what they need without ever asking them is a mistake. Again, I oftentimes reflect on my time in Mount Pleasant, and because we're the Green Knights, we had the Knights of the Round Table, where I invited, initially it started with the president and vice president of each of the student classes, but that started to look not very diverse. And so we kept restructuring it to say, what's the student voice? What are these students hearing? Because if we're just looking at subsets of people, then only one subset of people, then we're not going to be doing things that are inclusive. So I think student voice is absolutely vital to what we do here in terms of, again, we have an achievement gap because we have an opportunity gap. And if we don't talk to the students about what opportunities they feel like they need and want, then we'd be making a huge mistake. Does this plan look at only K-8 model? It does look at K-8, but I think that one of the things we talked about is our investment in pre-K. I think pre-K is vital, and I know you guys just were having some, I call it a tail end of a presentation on the funding for pre-K. But it's important. And I can't rattle off the numbers about pre-K students coming to kindergarten with the number of vocabulary words compared to some of their counterparts is disparaging. And so we've got to look at what can we do to make sure that that trend doesn't continue. So I think we have to look at pre-K, but I think we also have to look at high school on the other end, because ultimately we work in a pre-K, and I'm going to say to postgraduate system. I think we've got to be willing to look at what happens to students when they graduate. How are we sure that they're successful? One of my good friends and my college roommate, and both worked in the Job for Delaware graduates. And I know that they have a portion of their responsibility that is following students after they're done for 2 years. And I know we talked about doing that at some level around our CTE and our pathways. I don't know where that landed in terms of being able to continue to track them, but I think we've got to do a better job of tracking them and making sure they have their supports. I met with, I want to say Michelle Taylor from United Way, but don't hold me to that, it was called the Blue Duffel Bag Project, where there's a number of our foster children who, once they go to college and they're now out of foster care, their supports are gone. And so we've got to look at how can we support those students post-grad. So I think that this is an initial plan. I'm gonna call a phase plan, where we phase in this plan with the understanding that we're going to keep developing this plan in the best interest of the entire system. I think that's one of the things that's probably the most important, that we've got to get people to understand that this is just a phase of a plan that goes to a broader system of fixing the education system that, to me, has, people oftentimes have said it's been broken. I don't believe it's broken. I think it was working for the people it was intended to work for. And now we know that there's been some glaring omissions for the folks that it wasn't intended to work for. We've asked those people to assimilate into a structure that wasn't designed for them. And so now we've got to redesign that. And we owe that not only to the current group of students, but those who follow.
Hey, Jim, sorry, can I jump in? I just want to clarify something, because I've gotten this question, if it's all right with the chairs, that we're focusing on K-8, but this isn't saying every school has to be a K-8 model. This is open elementary to middle to both. So I just want to clarify, because I've gotten that question, that this isn't saying if you participate, you must have a school that is K-8. We're saying that those are the grade bands. Could be an elementary school, could be a middle, could be both.
Thank you for, so that's a great point, John. And because even when we look in Brandywine doesn't have a K-8 or 1-8 building. They have a K-5 at Harlan, and 6 through 8 at PS. So yeah, great point. Jeff, is that a hand raised or? Oh, okay, good. I think we talked about the transition to high school, and while we don't have those answers, I think it's important that we understand that if we can prepare them, if we can have students better prepared in 8th grade as they transition, I think we've got to look at bridge programs to support those kids. And oftentimes those bridge programs were more around structures and advocacy and self-advocacy for students. I think we've got to look at bridge programs differently, and how can we support those kids moving forward when they get to high school. What's the end game for the Wilmington Learning Collaborative? I think I've said it, that this is the beginning phase of a much bigger plan to restructure the educational system in Delaware, not just the city of Wilmington. I think the beginning part is the city of Wilmington. So let's pause and see if I rattled off a lot of thoughts. And so some of it, as I was answering those questions when Haley sent them to me last week, I had a chance to think through numerous times and change my answer. Certainly, does anyone have any questions about those? And then we can get into some of the pre-K stuff as well. And I know we have a small window of time. But
anybody from the group have questions for what Jim's presented, or as Haley indicated in the chat, any other questions you want to throw out to Jim that might have been sparked by his responses. John, I do want to thank you for coming to the meeting tonight. I didn't see you on my screen until somehow it rolled up just here, so.
Thanks for having me.
I have a quick questions. We always hear the discussions around the importance and the need for student voice. We talk about it a lot, and you guys had mentioned there's been 80+ meetings. So I'm just curious, has any of those meetings been with students in the city of Wilmington, past students that have been in our school system, current students? Because I feel like those voices are critical in this path and this plan moving forward, that if we're not getting feedback from our students and their families, I feel like that should come before an MOU is in place, so we can really understand and get some of their feedback from them. So when I hear student voice, I want to know where those voices are in those 80 meetings. Have we been able to capture any student voices, what their concerns are, some of their feedback, even students that have already graduated from the school system too?
So part of those are beginning tomorrow, I believe, is the first one with the family engagement. And when we did the neighborhood walk a couple Saturdays ago, and we have another one scheduled for this Saturday, we're asking those families to bring their students, because we would like, so the question is, do you have a student in blah, 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 blah? Are you willing to come to this meeting? We want to share our ideas on improving education outcomes. If you have a student in the system, can you bring them as well? Because we want them to not only hear, but we want to get their feedback as well. So that's part of the upcoming meetings over the next 2 weeks. I think there's 2 this week with families, and then 2 next week with families as well.
I just don't want those to be the end of it, because not all families are going to be able to attend those meetings, or students. So we might have to find other way to capture their voices. But I feel like before any MOU is put in place, that we really capture their stories and their feedback and their voices before even like moving forward. I think that's a critical piece that we sometimes forget and lose along the way.
I'll also add that when we were at the board workshop at Christina, this issue came up as well. And Christina is planning to have a student forum around this issue. And their board members were, they were deciding who and how many of them would be able to participate in that student forum. I don't know where their planning lies at this point, but that did come up at the Christina board. It was either at their workshop or at their board meeting. So they're planning to have a student forum, and certainly I think it's a great idea and great suggestion for others to follow suit in some way, shape, form, or fashion.
Thanks for the question, Karen. Representative Williams had her hand up. Kim, want to go ahead?
I caught that. Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for the presentation. I wanted to just quickly ask you, you mentioned, I think you said something about the charter schools. There are no charter schools were included in this possibility of joining this group, and none of them have opted to do that or are interested. Is that what you said? I just want to make sure I understood that.
Well, they did say something along those lines. I don't know if that was their decision was written in stone.
Right.
When we first presented it to them, and they were of the mindset that they had some of those flexibilities that we were willing to provide. I don't know that meant that was their final decision. We certainly, and even if it was, if the charter school network came to us and said, no, we want all out, and then Kendall Massett came back and said, we've reconsidered. This is not an exclusionary practice. Like, all are welcome. We met with them. That's what they thought initially. Maybe after hearing the presentation again, they say, we want to re-engage, or maybe an individual school wants to. We'd certainly be willing to take all of them on. We're not excluding anyone.
And one other question, the curriculum, well, I know you touched on that, but and I'm sorry if I missed it. will all the schools have the same curriculum?
So I think we threw that out as I'm going to say a caveat, because my example was that what we've seen is this population has a tendency to be more transient than some other populations. And so the example often used was 30th Street is the dividing line between Red Clay and Brandywine. And so Byron Murphy and I are now friends because of that dividing line. So a student would move one block over and have to leave Mount Pleasant and go all the way out to Dickinson. And so now not only is it a different travel line, 5 miles versus, I don't know, 10 miles, help me out, but it's a new principle, it's a new system, it's a new structure. All of this is new to a student who may or may not be struggling academically anyway. So Byron and I made a pact that anytime we received each other's kids, we would call each other, share some history. I would often say to the family, hey, Mr. Murphy's not as good of a principal as Mr. Simmons, but he's a really good guy anyway, so trust him, right? And so, and he would do the same, and it gave that student whose education is being disrupted maybe in the middle of the year to at least go in and say he has a common face and someone that's looking out for him. I would still do that right now. When somebody says they're going to Red Clay, whether it's a teacher or a student, I go, hey, the superintendent is a good friend of mine and he's really good at what he does. So I know that you're going to be in good hands. And so that's the way we have to do that. I say the same thing about Jeff Menzer, and he's not a friend of mine. So, so I think this collaborative gives us the opportunity to make sure that important piece of that wraparound services that student needs is still available regardless of where they go, if they move, if they don't move. Just think of kids who don't have, I'll say I'm fortunate, and I'm certainly kidding about Jeff not being my friend. I've been fortunate in my principalship to always have other principals in the other high schools or middle schools that were willing to collaborate regardless of what district we were in. And so I would argue all of us benefited from that, including our students. This is a structure that gives that again to maybe people who don't have that. Maybe there's new principals who don't have that same level of relationship or maintaining relationships that I was fortunate to have. I just met with Jeff about a month ago around the Boost 22 that you talked about earlier. And so that relationship that we not only formed, but maintained is so vital in supporting kids. And so I think we have an opportunity to do that around curriculum. But if that's not where the collaborative sees is the best bang for our buck, that's not something I would go, that's a game changer. I think that's an opportunity, but I think we could find other opportunities as well.
And thank you for that. I wanted to make sure I understood that, wanted to make sure that they were included in this as well. I thought they were, but there hasn't been a lot of talk around the charter schools. It's been about the 4 districts really. And the last thing I want to say, and you guys may have thought about this and maybe it doesn't matter. One thing that does concern me is there are a lot of lawsuits pertaining to special education that the school districts have to use local money to pay out from these lawsuits because they end up just not going to court. They end up negotiating. And so my concern is if we do have this new collaborative and we have like a separate group that oversees these districts, I know the districts will still be involved, but what if someone's not correctly following an IEP and the school district is really not as involved because it is a collaborative? They'll still be able to sue the school district. And I'm concerned on how that will, like, are we gonna be opening up for more lawsuits now? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I don't think that we'd be opening ourselves up to more. I think I don't know that the number would change because they're participating in a collaborative, because we still want to make sure that we're following all the special ed law and making sure students receive the services they do. I think that one of the answer is on the other end. When I was in Brandywine, it felt like, and maybe just because I was there, McAndrew's firm was in our district office every day, right? And so we had to find better ongoing professional development to make sure that mistakes weren't being made, balls weren't being dropped, to make sure that we were following all the laws in the benefit of the kid, right? Like, not just to eliminate the lawsuit, to make sure students were getting what they need. And so I think that could be part of this collaborative to ensure that we provide that professional development to make sure that those don't continue to happen.
Right. And sometimes it's not because laws are being broken. It's
No doubt.
Sometimes it's just that parents need more information, or it's not always that the school districts have done things that are wrong. My concern is that in the state of Delaware, in order to prove that you're innocent when it comes to special education, that the school district has to prove that they're not guilty. And Delaware is one of a few states that has to prove that when a lawsuit is brought forward, the school district and the charter school has to prove that they did nothing wrong. And so, so my concern is, because the school districts won't have complete oversight as they do right now, I just don't want to open ourselves up for even additional lawsuits, because the money that they use is monies that are local dollars. They're not state dollars. They use local dollars. So I'm just saying that's just something that I think that we should speak about, or think about ways to make sure that we don't have folks coming in and taking advantage of this, like some folks did with COVID and online learning. So that's all, because I know, I'm not here saying the districts are always perfect, but, I do believe that everyone does try to do the best for students. I have to believe that in order to be a legislator and be chair of the House Education Committee, being a mom and a community member, I believe that most people are doing what is best for kids. And sometimes I think there's a number of things that can go wrong there, but I just want us to think about that.
So Representative Williams, certainly that is on our radar. It's been brought up before. I know Jeff can't call you Kim, so I'm not going to do it either. When I was GA in Delaware, right before Darrell came, Coach Raymond came to me and said, you're now on the other side. You can call me Tubby. I said, all right, Coach Raymond, I'll see you on the field. So, Jeff, I'm with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. So I just want to be mindful of our time. This has been great dialogue and exchange. I believe it's what, I think many of us were hoping and looking for back in November when this came up as an agenda item. Our third presenter is not going to be joining us, it doesn't look like. So we do have about 5 more minutes of this conversation. I would, open the floor up to John if he has anything to add. And since Jim and I are such good friends, if you want to correct anything Jim said openly, publicly right here, feel free, John. Now you have the floor to set the record straight from anything he may have misspoke on.
I would just say I consider you a friend, Jeff. So at least you have me. You can count one. No, I mean, Jim did a great job, and I think a few points I would underscore is that this is really a partnership, and this is a collaboration. This is really intentionally not top down. This is ground up. This is empowering. I see Karen Eller on my screen, folks like Karen who are in front of children every single day and know what their students need. This is really working with the Wilmington community to build this from the ground up. So we have sort of the governor's come forth with a framework, and this is something that we are relying on folks on the ground to help build out. So I wanted to make sure we made that point. I know there are a few pre-K questions. I had the privilege of getting to chat with Dawn last week and getting her feedback. And again, want to tap into the experts who do this work every day for how we can best support children, best support our students. And so final piece I would just underscore is the timeline has come up quite a bit. And the fact that there's a lot of urgency, behind getting something done and moving forward. This is not intended to be built all at once and sort of dropped on the plates of educators. Again, just because Karen's on my screen, I see her. Educators like Karen, have been extraordinary over the past 2 years. And This is not, we do not want to add anything more to folks' plates. We want to empower them. We want to include them in decision-making. As Jim mentioned, we had such an impactful presentation from NEA about the benefits of shared decision-making and what that does for educator retention and what it does for student achievement. And so there's so much that's possible, but it's only possible if everyone's working together, because this is a coalition of the willing, and we want everyone to partner and come to the table together. So happy to address any other questions that come up, but just deeply appreciate, Jim, you did a great job, and the questions, I got a chance to see them, and they're so thoughtful. So we are here all the time to answer them. And so if something didn't get answered, give us a call or shoot us an email.
Thanks, John. Ray, did you have anything to add to the discussion, or any of the questions that we talked about during our planning or preparation meeting for this presentation that didn't come forward or we didn't hear about?
I don't, thank you. They were captured here. I'm sorry. Are you going to respond to any of the pre-K questions or no?
We can move down to the pre-K questions. I mean, I think that we have some time, so I would ask Jim to kind of prioritize, and maybe if there's some that can be put together, and then we can get to those questions now. And I know Jim put a pause for some questions. John referenced them in his conversations with Dawn. But if there's anything specific to the pre-K that you guys would like to speak to, please, feel free now.
Yeah, John, I'll defer to you first while I'm reading through them. I mean, to figure out how we can combine some. I know we have discussed including pre-K, because we want to talk about the whole child from his whole education system, which includes pre-K. And then I was with Kim Krasnowski earlier today when we presented to her, and she always tells me to make sure we start early. And so we certainly we want to make sure we address our pre-K questions. So let me see which ones we can group. But John, if you want to take a lead as I'm trying to decide.
Absolutely. So yeah, if it's okay, I'll go a little bit out of order. I think the one in column 20 or row 24 is really important. And we've heard this from a number of people, the need for before and after care. And so that's something that I think we absolutely need to look at building as a part of this. As far as transportation, that's a tough one. And so I don't know yet. It's something that we want to know from folks who do this work, how that could work to minimize that as a barrier. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm making it confusing jumping around. No,
you're fine.
One of the really, I think, powerful opportunities here is to create that connectivity between centers, whether they're childcare centers, whether they are family childcares, whether they're in districts, is to create that connectivity between early childhood and kindergarten. And so when it comes to who we would want to engage, I would argue everyone who is sending children to kindergarten at a city school. And so I don't think that we would discriminate between center-based, home, Head Start. I think it's an all of the above. I think 3 and 4-year-olds, looking at that is right. Obviously, as a larger issue, I know that the consortium has done a lot of work around home visitation and sort of the real 0 to 5 work. So it's all super important to prioritize as a part of this plan. I think probably looking at 3 and 4 or 4, but again, this is something that Jim and I and the governor shouldn't be sort of making the final call on. This is something that we should all be working on together. And then as far as quality measures, certainly want to increase seats in quality centers. But again, I would also look at family childcares and really all the programs that are feeding our schools. So that was a super quick point there. And we heard some really good feedback. We're also meeting with educators at city schools. DSEA and our district partners have been really good about facilitating those, and had a great conversation with the folks at Warner about the importance of making sure that children reach kindergarten ready to learn and the supports that are needed in the early years. And so I appreciate the time that they made. So bottom line is so critical that we get to children before they get to kindergarten, and we want to tap into the experts to make sure that the investments we're making, coupled with the investments that I know Reading secured last year, coupled with the ECAP investments that are coming from the settlement and continued investments in early childhood, that it's all going together to create a really good result for children.
Thanks, John. And Dawn, I think Dawn has a comment here for that. Dawn, did you want to share something?
I do. Thank you, Jeff. So two things. One, regarding transportation. I know we go back and forth on that, but if we are able to provide high quality before and after care that starts early and goes longer, then transportation is less of an issue, because we want to make sure that families have the extended time to be able to go to work, not only to go to work, but to get to work. And that's what we hear from so many of our families. But to say, to have children ride a bus or have transportation, if we're providing the aftercare, then we're meeting that need. We still have families who struggle with transportation, so don't get me wrong, but it's more difficult to provide transportation when families have different work schedules. Because, so if you give them the longer day of before and after care, I experienced this at Warner. You know, I taught preschool at Warner. I've been back in Colonial for several years. And when we provide the early before care and the later after care, then transportation becomes less of an issue, because we're giving parents that working flexibility. I just can't say that enough, but if you don't have before and after care, you must provide transportation, because then children need a place to go because their parents are still working. And then with the quality measures, I think that if you look at the RFP that was put out, the last ECAP RFP, in addition to the Reading RFP. So we need full day and we need the high quality. So if you go for full day, but you don't add quality, then kids aren't coming to kindergarten, you know, and we're not, and it's not even about coming to kindergarten ready. It's about in the moment, are children getting what they need in that moment, whether they're 3 or 4 years old? Are they getting what's best for them and best for their families? Because we're not looking for a place to just put children. We're looking for high quality.
Thanks, Tom. Well, I have to say this has been very informative. Are there any last questions before we kind of close out the meeting with a little bit of a preview of the path forward, and then open up for public comment? Any other questions from work group members for John or Jim?
I just had a quick question. I know the sessions are this week and next week in the school communities and with the different schools. Will those be offered again after the new year, or the timeline? This is kind of the only opportunity to have those sessions.
Yeah, great question. We haven't, it has been, we have such a busy month. We haven't sort of thought beyond that about how we want to continue the engagement. But let's talk about that. Would love to know your feedback.
Okay. Great.
And Jeff, this is not a question, but just a comment that through the process of engaging youth, I think it would be great to take a look at some of the bright spots from the city schools and find out what worked for them and incorporate that into the planning. But those are voices that are very valuable in this discussion too.
Agreed. There are plenty of those, and there are plenty of alumni and graduates from Wilmington high schools, Wilmington schools, and the Wilmington system that definitely could be centerpieces of the conversation. So good observation, Terry. Thanks for sharing. All right, Jim and John, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing your road show here in the next couple of months. I'm sure we'll be seeing and hearing from you again. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it, to not only to you, Jeff, but to the entire group for giving us some space and time. And so, Jeff, I'm sure we'll connect. I actually probably owe you a meeting from our last one. And so,
yeah, I can tell you I have a couple of lessons learned for you with the Boost 22. Some things that are some stumbling blocks that you'll want to consider. So
all right, so let's catch up sooner than later then.
Yeah, definitely.
But again, thank you to everyone. I put my email in the chat if you don't have it, in case something pops into your head that we didn't address, or another question or whatever. And so feel free to reach out. Have a great night. I'm going to try to get dinner before our next meeting, I think 7 o'clock.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right.
Okay. The next agenda item that we had prior to public comment was just a little bit of what the path forward is going to be for our next 2 meetings, which would be January 10th and February 15th. The plan is we're going to have in January, Terry is going to be presenting SEL, what it looks like in the classroom and in schools. And we're going to have Dr. Peoples also be available to begin the data conversation. What should be in the database or the data system that that made it through the recommendations from this group to the governor's office, and there is if I'm not mistaken, a line item in the budget for a data portal for social determinants of health with this work group, related to this work group. And sorry, Terry's making sure, social, emotional, behavioral, sorry, not just SEL, my bad, sorry, Terry. Presentation. And then in February, we plan on really picking up the data conversation with Adrian and Data Service Center. Data Service Center has been involved in a little bit of a project with the districts, current districts, and the University of Delaware in terms of compiling a database of Wilmington students that reside in the city of Wilmington. That's all the districts, all the students, at least right now, those districts and schools that utilize DSC, in order to better gather information around students real time, has also helped us build potentially a profile of what seniors and what students in the city of Wilmington actually experienced through the educational data management system that we share through Data Service Center. So I know that those are going to be maybe not as exciting conversations, but this group is often focused on the things that matter at the end of the day and for students and families. And a lot of times this data piece can tend to get in the way of making effective real-time decisions, and also having conversations about what's actually in front of us, not what we believe to be in front of us. So Ray, did I miss anything with respect to the path forward?
No, I think you covered it. I love the data conversations, just for the record.
Well, it should be interesting. I know that as another slight teaser, I know Data Service Center has met with the University of Delaware, as bringing on a new person in charge of, I think it's called the Data Research Alliance. They've hired a new director, and while Katie professes to be able to collect data, she does not profess to be an analyst. And so there's a conversation starting between UD and DSC around this set of data, and then providing analytical support around what the data says and making it usable and manageable in real time. And it's a project that I know Dean Henry from the University of Delaware has been supportive of. I've had a couple of conversations with him. So this data piece is what I was going to offer up to Jim. Like, we can do all these things across districts, but if you don't have the same data and you're not comparing apples and apples, it gets hard to make decisions around what's working and what's not working. So I think that that's one of the things that I'm learning, that it's not as easy to get the data together as one might have thought it would have been. So that's why I definitely am excited about the beginning of the data conversation in January and then into February. That is it for the path forward. And I think we're right on schedule with the 10-minute public comment period. I don't know. I see Deb Stevens is in the public, and
If they raise their hand, we'll know whether they want to make public
yeah.
comment.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay. Well, that said, then we'll all get 10 minutes to eat lunch or dinner, I'm sorry, before our next meeting then, I guess. What do you think, Kim? Is that a good idea? Should we close? I'm practicing.
Happy holidays, everyone. Get
Yes.
some rest.
Yeah. Happy holidays. And motion, Darrell, can we get, you're not, Darrell, no comments from you? No closing comments?
Oh, I just want to thank Haley for all that she does too.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. So nice.
Agreed.
I told you she's great.
Thank you, Haley.
Thank you.
Happy
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Motion to adjourn, Jeff. Have a good night.
Yeah.